There are times when active, vocal, declaratory warfare is exactly what is needed. But there is another dimension of spiritual warfare that is almost never taught, that is rarely modeled, that is radically undervalued in most spiritual communities. It is the warfare of what you do not say, what you do not react to, what you do not give access to, what you protect through silence rather than through declaration. That is the warfare I want to talk about today, because it is the warfare some of you are currently winning. They prepared for your anger. They have been in conflicts before, and they know what a reactive person looks like, and they know how to handle it. They prepared their response to your response. They had their counter-narrative ready for your narrative. They staged the entire dynamic around the predictable behavior of someone who has been provoked. And then you gave them something they had no playbook for. Peace. Genuine, unperformed, inexplicable peace. And they have been off balance ever since. Your silence is not the absence of a weapon. Your silence is the weapon they were never trained to fight. Let me describe how sophisticated opposition works, because understanding the mechanism helps you understand why your silence is so effective against it. When someone wants to harm you through conflict, whether through direct confrontation or through the more sophisticated route of social and reputational damage, they need your participation. Not your agreement, your participation, your energy in the system. Every response you give, even a correct one, is energy in the system. It gives the conflict momentum. It provides the other side with material, your words, your emotional state, your version of events that can be used, quoted, reframed, or presented as evidence for whatever narrative is being constructed about you. The skilled adversary knows this. They know that your righteous anger is more useful to them than your silence. Your articulate defense can be quoted out of context. Your frustration can be described as instability. Your passion can be characterized as aggression. And the more emotionally invested you are in being understood, the more material you generate for misrepresentation. But silence generates nothing. It cannot be quoted, it cannot be characterized, it cannot be made into evidence for anything except your stability and your lack of investment in the conflict's terms. The most sophisticated form of this realization, and the one that requires the most spiritual development to reach, is that your silence is not just defensive. It is not just the absence of vulnerability. It is an active, aggressive spiritual stance. It is refusal, resistance, a statement of non-consent to the entire frame of the conflict. The spiritual principle underneath this is one of the most important in all of Scripture. Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." But this is not primarily about the social intelligence of restraint, though that is real. It is about the spiritual intelligence of knowing when your speaking is serving a purpose versus when it is simply giving something access to you. Jesus, on trial before Pilate, demonstrates this principle at its highest level. The false witnesses spoke, the accusations piled up, the crowd called for his death, and the Scripture says he answered nothing. Not because he had nothing to say. He was the Word made flesh, the author of all language, but because the situation did not belong to the arena of verbal defense. It belonged to a different arena entirely. And in his silence, he maintained the spiritual authority that allowed the resurrection to happen. A reactive Jesus, defending himself in the court of human opinion, would have been operating in the natural realm. His silence was the posture of someone who knew that the real battle was taking place somewhere the human court could not see or touch. Your silence is the posture of someone who knows that the real battle is not in the arena where the provocation is occurring. Here is the honest testimony of what it took to get to this silence. You were not always silent. There was a version of you earlier in this conflict, earlier in this year or this season or this relationship that responded, that tried every reasonable approach, that sought clarity, sought resolution, sought the repair that healthy people seek in conflict. And none of it worked, because you were seeking resolution in a conflict that was not designed to resolve. You were using the tools of healthy relationship navigation in a situation that was structured to defeat those tools. The silence is not something you achieved through spiritual discipline alone. It is also something you arrived at through the exhaustion of trying everything else, through the accumulation of evidence that your engagement was costing you without producing anything of value, through the specific kind of grief that comes when you finally accept that the relationship you were hoping to restore does not exist in the form you were hoping to restore it to. The silence came partly from growth and partly from loss. Both of those things are true, and holding both of them without shame, the spiritual maturity and the genuine grief, is itself a form of the very wholeness your silence is producing.
The silence you have been maintaining right now in the spiritual realm. It is cutting off the supply of energy that was sustaining the conflict and the opposition. Every engagement you made previously was, energetically, a resource transfer. Your attention, your emotional investment, your spiritual focus, these are not trivial. They are the currency of spiritual warfare. And you were spending them on the conflict rather than on your calling. The silence has redirected that currency. The energy that was going into the loop is now going into your prayer life, your work, your relationships with the people who are actually for you, your development in your calling. You are running hotter in the places that matter because you have stopped leaking through the places that didn't. And simultaneously, the opposition, now running without your energy to fuel it, is running on fumes. The sustainability of any opposition depends partly on the resistance it encounters. Your engagement was the resistance that kept the engine running. Remove the resistance, and the engine loses its purpose and eventually its coherence. The silence you have been maintaining is not just wisdom. It is war, and it is winning. The shift you are beginning to feel in your spiritual life, in your clarity, in the momentum of things moving forward, is the downstream effect of the silence working exactly as God designed it to. If your silence has been misread as weakness when it was actually warfare, if you have been in a situation where your non-reaction was interpreted as defeat or fear or inability to respond when it was actually a deliberate and costly spiritual strategy, comment warfare in the comments. Because this needs to be named. The spiritual discipline of chosen silence in the face of provocation deserves a witness, and this community is going to be that witness for you today. Comment warfare, and subscribe because I am building a full teaching on the spiritual dimensions of silence, the different kinds of silence and what each one accomplishes, and specifically how to distinguish between the silence of fear and the silence of spiritual authority, because they look similar from the outside and feel completely different from the inside. You need that teaching. Comment warfare. I'll see you in the next one.